asking myself for a few questions. So firstly, one that I personally want to know, where did your research stem from? Where did this all come about? Where did your interest, that's too, that's not really a good enough word, is it? Your passion, if you will, for this come from?
Yeah, because it is quite niche, isn't it? It is an interesting question. So the book is basically what was my PhD. So it has taken a long time to get to this stage. But initially, my idea for my PhD came from my MA dissertation. So my MA dissertation was looking at the role of performance in kind of peacekeeping. So particularly the kind of idea of a royal procession in which the order of things really helps to keep kind of hierarchy and public image for a monarch. How does that function as a role of kind of establishing rule and harmony and peace? And then the opposite of that, in fact, became much more interesting because I think more often than not, even though public performance is trying to establish the status quo, it's doing that because there is conflict or because there's a need to do that. So that was the idea for the PhD, was what is the role of performance in conflict, which is quite broad for a PhD. So I spent the first maybe year or so figuring out what types of conflict were happening related to theatre. And noticed that libel kept coming up. Then realised if I was going to do that, I would need to do some significant archival work that I was not ready for. So I spent the rest of my PhD trying to get my head around these archives. And they're not published anywhere. In fact, a lot of them have not been written on. There are a lot of them at Kew, at the National Archives. The more I looked at them, the more fascinated I became, and the more, the idea for the project kind of took shape.
That naturally leads into the next question, could you tell us a bit more about your archival work? How you went about it, how you go about it now?
Yeah. It's an interesting question because it takes time. I think we all realise the process of writing and thinking takes time. The process of going to London to see these, so I photographed them. I learned very quickly that I needed to have a process for doing that, because first of all I went and just took loads of pictures and got home and was like, what was this? I learned a lot about that. You can just photograph for the day, come home and then sit and transcribe. The process of transcription I also find really thought-provoking. So it's an odd kind of mechanical process in a way. You're just kind of copying what is there, typing it out as you go. But I think because that means you have to spend a lot of time with the text themselves, you familiarise yourself with them in a really different way than just reading. So you're kind of typing out, you're also having to mirror things like the crossing out, the annotations, the insertions, in a diplomatic transcription is what we would call it. So not a kind of edited version, but a literal copying of what is on the page as much as you can. And so that means you are following almost the thought process of the person having written it out in a way that I think, it also allows me time just to think about what's happening and the different perspectives that are kind of being narrated. So I guess one of the biggest things that I find really useful is the Fictions in the Archives work by Anthony Davis, who says that, especially legal cases, even though it kind of purports to be a factual record, it is a fiction. And so much of the law, I think, is also kind of persuasive fiction, persuasive performance, which you know a lot about. So, yeah, where was I going with that? I think by doing archival work and transcribing, you follow the fictions that those, or the narratives that those particular documents are trying to kind of create in a really interesting way. Yeah.
We're saying about going down to London.
Yeah.
Just have a bit of time for that. That brings us well to the next question. A lot of your work is focused more on the South Country, specific provinces. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the reason, rationale, the methodology for choosing that particular region, any challenges you might have faced with that?
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question. So Rebecca and I have methodological discussions all the time. Do you want to say a little bit about your methodological approach before I try and kind of articulate my own?
Well, I'd be the same. I'd be like trying to articulate as well.
Rebecca works on bibliotherapy, which is really amazing. Do you want to say a bit about that? Your methodology is in process. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So my research is on Shakespearean comedy and bibliotherapy. I look at bibliotherapeutic theory, which is, I guess, in the recent history has been quite medical based, and it's coming to try to be more integrated into the arts now. And I'm looking at that specifically from an arts perspective, and how that can be applied for contemporary audiences in a therapeutic setting, or in a therapeutic way, not so much a setting, taking therapy out of the clinical context and into performance, which brings us back to.
Yeah, thank you. And I asked that because I think there's a really interesting interdisciplinarity or cross-disciplinarity that, like, I spend a lot of the time, and I think probably why it's taken me this long to write this, is that multiple audiences want different things from you. So that kind of, what is the setting of your work, for who is your research pertinent, therapeutic? Obviously mine is not in any way therapeutic, it's in fact horrible in a lot of ways. But I think, so it took me a long time to figure out who I was writing for or to, and I say that because the kind of legal element of the work took a lot of time to get my head around. It was also something that readers, reviewers challenged me on a lot of the time. This needs more legal grounding, this needs less legal grounding. People are not interested in the legal side of things, people are really interested in the legal side of things. And on top of that then you have, so I've always had a kind of split audience, or I think of it as a bit of a split audience between history and literature. So these records are always much more familiar to historians, but the verse and theatrical content of them is absolutely brilliant for literary scholars, and so trying to trade off those audiences against each other, I find myself in a bit of an impossible position quite a lot of the time, but I do think that that is the interesting space. So I don't know if you find that the actually having multiple audiences kind of makes you ask different questions.
That's true, yeah. I think it's really a way to look at it as well, because that, like you were saying earlier, that could be a point of frustration in itself. So that idea of turning something that can be quite a challenge into something productive, or I don't quite know what the word would be, but just having a productive mindset on that is very inspiring, really.
Yeah, Yeah, generative. I do find it generative. You do also spend a lot of time in rooms feeling like you're the outsider to the audience, which I kind of like also. But it does allow you also, if you get difficult questions, to say, thanks, I'll go away and kind of read up on that. Yeah. Yeah, how are we doing for time? Keep going?
Yep.
Okay, so another question then about regions. So you mentioned Kendal in your lecture. Have you come across any other more northern Libel? Has there been any in Lancaster? Any involving our very our very own court of law, but maybe not.
Yeah, and this is a really uncannily perfect place, right, to talk about this, because a castle that is a castle and a law court kind of in operation, and a prison, and do you know, I haven't got any for Lancaster itself, but there is a really big one that I'm working on for Preston, which is fascinating and may well be the next, it's the next project. I'm yet to think how it will take shape, whether it might just be a few articles or there's enough for a book maybe, I don't know. So the Justice of the Peace, a guy called Mr. Blundell in Preston. So on New Year's Eve in the early 17th century, some people who had been to the pub, some local tradesmen who had been to the pub, kind of including like a shoemaker, a chapman, a butcher, they come out of the pub on New Year's Eve. It's like around kind of 10, 11 o'clock at night, they've already been in the pub, and they are walking by the rogues post, so the public punishments kind of marketplace where they whipped rogues, vagabonds. Somebody has stuck on the rogues post a libel that's a verse about the local justice, Mr. Blundell. They caricature him as the devil of Ince, which is where his hall, his house. And they draw a caricature of him with a pair of horns and smoking a pipe and whipping the poor. And they post it on the rogues post. These guys find it on New Year's Eve, take it back to the pub with them and read the verse out loud. Obviously then get in trouble for that. But then what happens is the Star Chamber investigate the case, and when cases happen in the provinces, instead of having all of, so big high profile cases like that, because he's a justice, it's a really kind of something that the central government wants to suppress, that they want to stamp down on it. But instead of having like all of the people that they might examine come to Westminster to be examined, they send a commission to the provinces to do the examinations. The examinations happen in Preston itself. The people who have found the libel and read it aloud realise that they've kind of got a bit of a way of hijacking the court process. So they write a fake set of interrogation questions and get them snuck into the commission. So the commissioners examine witnesses on all these questions that are like, hey, what's the justice like with the poor? How is he with women? What's his conduct in public office like? And then all of these witnesses testify that he's a terrible person. And so they manipulate the legal process in a way that is, I've never seen it before. There's a really well-known scholar who's a legal historian at Oxford, who is essentially like a lawyer for the Star Chamber, which is amazing. So I consult him if I have any legal questions about Star Chamber. He's never seen anything like that before. So it's a really interesting case. It's happening in Preston. They're kind of manipulating the fact that it's happening in Preston and not in London by hijacking the legal case. And yeah, Mr. Blundell just also got what was coming to him, I think.
I feel quite ashamed to admit that I am born and bred in Preston and I did not know.
It's one of those. This happens quite a lot with archival work. you come across things that were unexpected. They're not the things that you have gone there to look at. You call them up in the Star Chamber records. They bring you out of boxes that I'm not kidding. They're like that big, like you carry them like this. Open them up, and they have multiple cases in the box because they're not very well catalogued or have a kind of chaotic filing system. So you get a whole box of cases at the same time, and you have to like root through the box to try and find the one that you're after. And I started as a practice just looking for related cases in the boxes when they came, and this one was there. So it's like you just couldn't plan for that in terms of archival work, but it's a really rich kind of source. Also, if anyone wants to do archival work, the Elizabethan Star Chamber papers, records, they're not even properly catalogued. So there is so much work to be done. There is one person who's made it her life work to try and catalogue properly the Star Chamber records for Elizabeth's reign. When you think about the high profile nature of that court and the things that are being tried there is so much material, but it's not accessible because it's not catalogued properly yet. So yeah, go do some Stack 5 Elizabeth Star Chamber work. Anyone? Yeah. Shall we end there?
Well, before we end, is there a copy of the book in the room with us?
There is.
Would you be able to, clearly Claire's been far too self-effacing. Rebecca, could you tell us the title? And
Go for it. Performing libel in the provinces.
And would I be right in saying it's available in all good bookshops? Would that be a fair?
Yeah. And online. It's online.
And on even online bookshops as well. Well, I think we congratulate Claire and Rebecca for a fantastic talk and a wonderful achievement with the book as well. So, kind of huge round of applause. Questions at the end?
Oh, the other question, yeah, was at the end.
I don't know, people might have questions right now. It feels like, should we, if that doesn't upset the apple. There's a hand that's flown up, so we're off.
I'm really interested in what you were saying before, Claire, about this kind of this hypermobility that vagrants had that allowed the sort of the spreading of these libels. And I'm really interested if there's something in there about this kind of move from this very kind of static centres of power that you had in sort of the medieval era through into, I guess, a more mobile society. I wonder if there's something in that about, I guess, how they kind of arrested people who performed libel, kind of what was, if you know anything about the process of that.
Yeah, two great questions. Yeah, two questions in that. That are really great. So one of the historians who's done a bit of work on libels alongside other forms said that the early modern period was really interesting because it was at once intensely localized. So your life, if you were a kind of not one of the nobility or wealthy, was lived in your local area, in your neighbourhood, in your parish. But at the same time, it was a society that was rapidly heading towards incorporation and nationality, so centralising at the same time. And so actually part of the tension that causes this kind of writing is about that tension between kind of an idea of a life lived in one particular place versus what happens when mobility becomes much more everyday and the central government also wants to be kind of doing that top-down governance in a really unique way. You also asked about arrests. So arrests in this period are really interesting. There's a really good friend who works at Sheffield who is doing a project on this. So the Star Chamber also is interested in arrests that go wrong. So there are cases about failed arrests. Essentially what you had to do to arrest someone was you had to have a warrant which you gave to bailiffs and constables, they went to find the person with the heavies and like physically apprehended them. They issue you the warrant and say you are under arrest, and then they have to forcibly take you. But loads of the time, people realised that this was a totally fallible process. So you could take the warrant and rip it up, you could hide it. Some of them made the bailiffs eat the warrants. And believe it or not, I have been involved in a workshop in which this was like practice as research reformed. And they had a, you know, one of those chocolate medal things as the arrest warrant, and they made them eat it. So yeah, the Star Chamber is interested in those. It happened a lot. And also, if you are being arrested, you can hide inside your house because they're not allowed to arrest you if you haven't kind of, unless you are in a public, you're in the public street. They can't go into your house and arrest you. And also, if you have enough manpower with you, you are not arrestable. So yeah, there's a whole interesting performance dynamic to that during this period.
Thank you very much, Claire.
You mentioned the iconic character of Blackfighter, which is obviously a key feature in a lot of early medieval morality plays. I was just wondering, with the source that you looked at, did you notice any other things that were any other features that were comparable to things that may feature in medieval drama?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, one of the things that I have also been struck by is the use of boy actors or use of children for libeling purposes, which obviously is an awful practice. But the idea of the medieval kind of morality play that uses boy actors, I think, in the role of backbiter, because he's a messenger, he's also referred to often as boy, carries over, interestingly, I think. So lots of libel cases say or report that libel verses or songs were recited in public by boys, by children. And that's seen as it's causing more offence, because if a child is kind of libeling someone in authority, then the social inversion is bigger. Like a little bit like the medieval boy bishop practice. So they dressed, so on like festive days when they were carnivalesque, kind of subverting church practice, they dress boys up as bishops and have them kind of process in church and things. So I think libels are playing on that long-standing tradition of kind of child actors being able to do things that adult actors are not able to. There's one libel case where they report that the son of the person who has written the libel essentially was found rehearsing it in his father's study. So he testifies that he couldn't read it at first, but some of his father's friends helped him to learn the words so that he can later recite it in public. So that's one thing I think that's striking. Another aspect of these medieval morality plays is that they also are quite multimedia. So they often have like the Lincolnshire example, that's a summer lord play, that is a kind of morality play type. It has a maypole and they stick her mock coat of arms to the maypole. They also have someone give a mock sermon that libels the person. Those kind of multimedia, multi-textual things are like a big part of early drama that I think the libels multimedia stuff is playing on.
Yeah, I had two questions. I think they feel obvious, so sorry if they are. The first is, through the Mousetrap play, is it fair and proper to think of Hamlet as a libelist? And the second is, when you mention the gallows, making these, it made me think. So, were the anti-Pence gallows, on June 6th, libelous? And with that, what is the relationship between libel and the veracity or necessity of threat?
Yeah, thank you. Those are not some.
Okay.
Those are really great questions. Is the Mousetrap in Hamlet, kind of libelous. Yeah, I possibly, yeah, that kind of audience response to material that is inflammatory. And all of the examples are playing on that a lot of the time the person being targeted is in the vicinity and will have a reaction.
Right.
And the more adverse the reaction, the better for the libeller, because that does reveal something about them being concerned with this type of rumour. So that is really interesting. Shakespeare's relationship to libel itself is also quite interesting. So he only uses libel as a word in the Roman context. Otherwise, he uses slander, which you can see here, which is deliberate use of terminology, I think. There is some work. I don't know how far I agree with this or not. There is one article, I think, that suggests one of the reasons that Shakespeare might have gone to London in the first place from Stratford was that he might have had a hand in a libelous verse and be kind of evading detection by going to London. I kind of like that idea, even although I don't necessarily think it's got the evidence to be true. Kind of like that idea that we get Shakespeare working in London because he's been implicated, and he then avoids using the word libel because slander is safer because it's not. That's nothing to do with him, and that's a kind of gendered female. Slander is much more gendered female than libel. Libel is masculine kind of realms. That's a different argument. Yeah. What was the other part of the question?
Yeah.
Oh, the gallows.
Yeah, the
So,
gallows.
yeah. Those are really disturbing. I found a couple of cases, and it gets written up in that treatise by William Hudson as a form of symbol that's used for libel. So in one of the cases, they make this kind of mock gallows, and they hang the verse from the gallows, and the verse is kind of the stand-in for the target. So yeah, a much more kind of sinister tone, but I do think it goes back to the morality play thing, because the vices being hanged is part of, on stage in Saturday Nov, the Three Estates, early Scottish play, is part of the kind of purging of vice, and the kind of role of the hangman being flattery in that case, or the backbiter kind of figure. Lots of the libel verses also talk about being the hangman of the person that you're libeling. So this kind of idea, I think it comes from the fact that they treasure their reputation as if it were their life, because in a lot of cases it kind of is. So the act of libel then takes on a much more sinister kind of role. It's a bodily threat. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a question, which is just sort of thinking about the 17th century as the kind of golden age of libel, as it seems to be. Just sort of, do things go down after the Civil War? And I have two questions, I'm cheating here, which is it a good thing or a bad thing for there to be a lot of libel? Because you could say it's a sign of a vibrant public sphere, and the price you pay for that is some people are bad-mouthing other people, but maybe that's better than a totalitarian society where no one says the wrong thing. So,
Yeah.
just two questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, does it calm down after the Civil War, during the Civil War? So the Star Chamber gets abolished in 1642 as part of the Civil War dispute, because it was seen as because it was a monarch's prerogative court. Charles I abused the Star Chamber in a way that James I didn't. He had cases tried there that he particularly wanted a certain outcome for, and used it as a mechanism of kind of monarchical control. They also, the secret nature of some of the processes of examination and punishment that the Star Chamber dealt out were parts of the reason for its abolishment, as part of that Parliament versus monarchy dispute. So I don't think that libelling stopped, but the records stopped because the court is abolished. So I mean, the post-Civil War kind of satirical bent, I think, doesn't, like newspapers, satirical cartoons and things that happen after the Civil War, I would guess is a kind of continuation. But yeah, the particular set of records stopped when we started, but stops. What was the second part?
Is it good to have lots of libel?
Yeah. That is a really fascinating question, I think. Is it good? Healthy public debate, I guess. I think in a lot of the cases I talked about where the poor or lower status people can use it as a mechanism of protest and agency, I do see something kind of good about it, although the form that it takes more often than not is really damaging. So yeah, that kind of, I think there are contemporary parallels where public discourse gets really personal and really insulting, and that is damaging, and we should kind of refrain from that. But I do think public discourse, so the public sphere being a place where everyone can express their opinions, whether that's libelous or not, I think is, healthy for democracy. It's a really hard question to answer. What do you think, Michael?
Well, I just think that there are so many contemporary resonances. I was thinking of the phenomenon of the super injunctions, so that incredibly powerful people can have a relationship with the public sphere, which is very different from that ordinary human beings. I was also thinking of cases where people in a sense can benefit from being libelled. I'm thinking of to trivialise things slightly, I was thinking about the beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake recently, and that kind of just extraordinary things they say about each other, but I'm guessing their record sales went up while the kind of reciprocal libels were being traded. So that's, I don't know, but I think it's a really intricate question to reflect on.
Yeah, I think for the 17th century too, high profile people at court. So I've talked about private libel, but there is much more work done on political libel that targets government officials, notorious nobility, the monarch. So particularly the Duke of Buckingham has become a figure in public. There was a series made about him recently, and I can't remember the title of it. He gets libelled so much, the Duke of Buckingham, because he's a favourite at court for James and Charles. And I think that does wonders for his public image, because he's being talked about. He's kind of upwardly mobile and beautiful, and he gets libelled and everybody's talking about him. So it's the same thing. Not quite Drake and Kendrick Lamar, but
Is there kind of theological dimension to it? You mentioned the one where the boy reports that the Puritans are in hell as well as landlords, so that would seem to be there's a theological edge to that, and then the sense that or is there a theological dimension in the sense that if I commit libel, that I am committing a moral sin that's ultimately a sin, and to the extent that I could be excommunicated. So how far is that at play in all of this?
yeah, very much so. So there is an argument that part of the Civil War is about religious difference between Puritans and kind of the old communal charity that was part of Catholicism and ritual, and lots of libel stems from those disputes that kind of broadly speaking Puritans were policing communal public life, so no swearing, no drinking, no ritual, and that's why I think a lot of libels that target Puritans use those forms, because it's the most effective way to annoy a Puritan is to sing a song about it. But there also is kind of interesting theological perspective behind the change in the recriminalisation. So in the 1590s, the reason that they criminalised private libel is because there's been a series of quite high-profile cases connected to the Mar Prelate tracts. Don't know if people have heard of these. So the Martin Mar Prelate was the kind of Puritan side of things voice who wrote pamphlets against the bishops. They were trying to remove the power of bishops. And what two quite prominent bishops decided to do in return, so against these kind of anti-prelate pamphlets and tracts, is to engage some very good writers, like Nash and Green. I'm looking at Liz here, who will know about this, to write their own anti-Martinist, anti-Martin Mar Prelate pamphlets in the same vein. So there's basically this kind of pamphlet war between the Puritan and the non-Puritan factions at the time, which leads to the bishop's ban. So the two bishops who are responsible for the anti-Martinist pamphlets, they decide that because they basically inflamed this pamphlet war, they will ban satires and epigrams in print from about the 1590s onwards. So that kind of suppression of this type of railing in public in print. Some historians have argued that's why we get libels, because they go kind of underground, they go into manuscripts and they go into lots of different forms instead of being print media. So that it definitely has a theological underpinning. Sorry, that's a very long answer.
Thank you.
In terms of like the spatial dynamics of libel and relationship with religion, is the depiction of hell and heaven a common feature, or is purgatory also featured in there? Is it around this time Calvinism starts rising, so purgatory is kind of pushed aside?
It's an interesting question. I have not come across any of them referencing purgatory, but that's not to say it's not out there. Yeah, heaven and hell is a really common, and picturing or versifying against your target as the devil is really, really common. So the Preston example, there's one from Yorkshire that also pictures the target as a devil. I also found a record that records how one might impersonate a devil, which kind of lives with me. So they're trying to persuade this wealthy woman to sign away all her wealth, and they dress someone up as a devil by putting like a dishevelled wig, giving him a light to uplight his face, and kind of a pipe. They send him up a ladder to her window while she's asleep in bed, and he puts the pipe in at the window and says, "Give all your money away." Which sounds really low tech, but was obviously effective. Because she did. She woke up and thought she had seen a vision of the devil telling her to sign all her money away because it was a bad thing to hoard wealth. And then obviously later found out she'd been completely fleeced and took them to court. So weird tangential dispute, but actually if you wanted to make someone look like the devil, apparently you could quite effectively theatrically impersonate the devil and convince someone that there was a devil alone.
Brilliant stuff. I think it's nearly lunchtime. I've been thinking what the opposite of a libel is. It's probably like an encomium or a panegyric or something like that. And I think this is what we need to offer Claire and Rebecca from just an absolutely compelling session. So let's offer a start again 1 o'clock-ish. That gives you the time to